Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Last week I promised you I would have a big announcement this week, and I do. I have a new book out. It is all about the medicinal shrubs and woody vines of the American Southeast Mid-Atlantic region. In fact, that's the title of the book. As I've explained before, we have such incredible, rich variety of plant life in this region. People think of the South as hot and muggy, and when people think of the South, I guess they're thinking probably Atlanta or something. Well, where I live in North Carolina, my home is at about 5,000 feet elevation. I'm in USDA hardiness zone. I think now they're saying about 6A. At some point, it was 5B. It's really not much different than upstate New York in terms of climate, except for one thing. I get 270 days per year average precipitation, which makes it more similar to the Pacific Northwest. In fact, I live in a temperate rainforest. Now, I can go a couple peaks over, I'm out of the rainforest. I'm just in the mountains. I can go from my house, say, not even 5 miles away to the next little village over. I'm at a full USDA hardiness zone warmer. That continues as I go down the mountain, whether I'm going to Tennessee, whether I'm going up into Virginia, which is a lower elevation, South Carolina, Georgia, or on across the state of North Carolina, where I'm passing through hardwood forests, passing through the Uwharrie Mountains, which are probably the oldest mountains on Earth. There are plants that grow there that you just will not see anywhere else. It was probably once the world's tallest mountain range, and it's now weathered down to, I think, about 700 feet at its highest point. It's an incredible place. Very few people know about the Uwharries. It's actually where America's first real gold rush was. A lot of the gold that's in Fort Knox came straight out of the Uwharrie Mountains in North Carolina. The next big gold rush being in Georgia, and then heading out west and Nevada and California, and then up into Alaska. But it really started right here in North Carolina. And the Uwharries are a really neat place, very historic, especially if you like natural history. And if you do visit Uwharries, be sure to visit Morrow Mountain. Morrow Mountain is the highest peak. It's up between, let's just say, Albemarle and Baden. Baden is an interesting town in and of itself. It was actually founded by a French aluminum company because they had a dam there and they were making aluminum. They brought in and built the first townhouses in the United States, and everybody who lived and worked in the town spoke French. When the World Wars broke out, they all went back home to fight for France. And basically, the federal government took over the town and they built airplane parts and weapons. And it was like top secret, and no one was allowed in and out during the wars and even for sometimes afterwards. So that's kind of neat, too. It's an interesting town to look at. But Morrow Mountain is the peak near there, and it's really beautiful. You kind of wind up there, you look out over the valley. And like I said, it's maybe 700 feet tall or so. It's not that high up, but it feels like you're high up. And you're actually looking out over the Hardaway site, which is one of the most significant paleological and archaeological finds in the entire country. what they call primitive Indian tribes live there, and they use the stone that really only comes from right there to make arrowheads and such. They found those arrowheads traded with tribes all the way down to Alabama and all the way up to the Iroquois and the Mohawks and beyond. It's a really important site, but they also found dinosaur bones. So that's pretty cool. But if you go up there to Mora Mountain, I know I'm wandering far afield here, look at the beautiful stonework of the picnic area, the observation area. My grandfather did that, so I'm very proud of that. He laid that stone. Anyway, just to emphasize the uniqueness of this region, if you continue on down from the middle of the state where the Uwharrie Mountains are, you're getting into the coastal plateau, you get into the swamps, and then you get to the coast, which you're in a subtropical climate. So really, you can drive, just say 5 hours from where I live to the coast, maybe six, right? Or you could go even further out to Lake Manteo, on the far western part of the state, out past Cherokee. And you've gone through regions that are like micro representations of just about every climate and region east of the Mississippi, plenty west of the Mississippi too, but not, the Southwest. We don't have deserts and such. We do have sandhills. It's another unique region. But we have climate here that's the same as, say, all the way down to South Georgia in some places, North Florida, and all the way up into Canada and the Pacific Northwest. So all this diversity of wildlife, all this diversity of plants that grows here is absolutely phenomenal. There's so many very rare herbs that grow here that literally grow nowhere else but the mountains of China. And sometimes, like I said, the mountains of New York will have a couple of things similar. Just really rare plants here, and like I've said many times, it's a mushroom hunter's paradise with 270 days a year of precipitation. But this book really focuses in on the shrubs and the woody vines, as they're called. Now, what's a shrub? Okay, shrub is actually the technical term for a bush. Don't know why they say shrub as opposed to bush. In Latin, it's wepress. I don't know where the origin of this term comes from, but we're talking bushes. Shrubs are bushes. They're not as tall as trees, but they can actually be quite small. Um, Actually, the cover of my book, I have a picture of the spotted wintergreen, Chimphalon ballata, that grows around here. It is only grows, I'm going to say, 3 to 4 inches tall, and it's actually in the Ericaceae family, and it's actually a shrub, believe it or not. So you can actually have a shrub that is only a few inches tall. Club moss would be another one, Lycopodium. It actually grows all around me. Kind of funny, a few years ago, I was talking to my herbalist friend up in Canada, Tori, and she said, "You must have a ton of club moss growing around there." And I'm like, "God, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that." And she says, "Yeah, it's got to be around there. Look at your climate." And I walk outside, and all these things that I had grown up thinking were like little pine trees or something growing in the woods were actually club moss, a very useful herb that I had never been introduced to until just a few years ago. It's one of the ingredients in the Swedish bitters. It's a very good herb to have on hand. And yeah, we actually have so much of it that harvesting club moss and galax was a major industry in the mountains of North Carolina. The kids would go out, and the adults too, and they would gather it by the bushels full, and they'd send it by train up to florists in Chicago and New York, and that was a way they made their money. And it was used for decorations in by florists, until well, some of the protections kind of came into place a few decades ago, and really the industry changed. Believe it or not, most of the fresh flowers and such you buy from a florist, most of the decorations, most of the plants are not grown in this country. They're being shipped in from 10,000 miles away. So, I think it would be a lot better if we kind of got our agriculture back to being domestic and quit doing stuff like that, so that when the supply chain gets disrupted, as it has been recently, we have food on our shelves. I just went to the grocery store to get my dog some dog food, and the shelves were empty. They had some like brands that he won't eat, honestly, in like, the huge bags, all the small bags and medium-sized bags of dog food. Shelf was empty and has been for a week. I don't know why that's happening. Is it the sudden shortage on corn because corn lack of fertilizer, the war in Ukraine, and domestic pressures. I don't know. But if we were making more stuff, growing more stuff here at home, we wouldn't have to worry about empty shelves. That's another point entirely. But like I said, those two small plants are shrubs, believe it or not. And shrubs can be as large as like a holly bush that can grow as big as a medium-sized tree. One thing I always try to point out is that herbal medicine uses all manner of medicinal plants. Herbs are not just, little green things. It's not just sage and mint and little things growing a few inches tall, tender little herbaceous plants. No, herbs can be shrubs, herbs can be trees, herbs can be vines. And I have some really fascinating information about the medicinal use of some of our native and introduced um, what we call woody vines. They're not tender vines that will be killed by a frost, but those that are a little more hardy. That includes honeysuckle. Honeysuckle, for instance, is strongly antiviral. Japanese honeysuckle is the one that's been studied the most, the one we know most about. It's considered an invasive weed. Most people want to get rid of it. I think it smells wonderful, but most people want to get rid of it. It is a strongly antiviral herb. You can probably look outside and see several of these, just right away. One that's very interesting is beautyberry. Beautyberry has been shown, I think it was University of Louisiana, and there are studies from other places, that it repels mosquitoes and fleas and ticks. You can rub the leaves on your skin. I'm sure you could make a tincture out of it. You can make a spray out of that tincture. The berries are bland but edible, and that's a common landscaping plant that does very well. And you're probably going to see it, really all over the place. It has those clusters of berries on the stem. It looks very unique because of that. There's barberry. I've talked at length about barberry before. Barberry and Oregon grape, which are great liver stimulants, which are antiseptic, which have all kinds of wonderful properties, can be used internally and externally. There's serviceberry, which is a very interesting plant. We have, I think, two native varieties tend to grow more toward the coast. Serviceberry was very well recognized as both an edible fruit and an herb in especially British herbal tradition. And George Washington planted them at Mount Vernon, probably for the fruit. He was always interested in finding interesting fruits. He liked to make beers and wines. We don't know if he, of course, used them medicinally. Essentially, the service berries are a laxative, and the leaves and bark are astringent. The Chippewa use the root bark tea as a tonic for excessive menstrual bleeding, a female tonic, and to treat diarrhea. The Cherokee used the herb in combination as a digestive tonic, and a bath of the bark tea was used for children with worms. So that's interesting indigenous tradition. In these books, I try to trace the herb back as far as I can go. I go back, to the ancient Greeks or beyond. If I can find that the Egyptians or Babylonians used these plants, I get that research and I put it in front of you. Then I move up through monastic medicine, through the Middle Ages, the Benedictines. I get into the Central European traditions, what the Polish folks use, German folk medicine, Russian folk medicine, the Ashkenazi Jewish herbal tradition. I follow this herbal lore as it moves into England, the British tradition. Then I come over to America. I look at what did the various Native American tribes use these plants for that we know about. I look at what did the early American herbalists use these plants for, the Thomsonians and the eclectics. I look at how these plants were used in the Revolutionary War as medicine, in the Civil War, thanks to some great documents like Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests. And I trace it really through the 1920s and 40s, like Jethro Kloss and Back to Eden, and then bring it into the modern era with field guides and some more modern herbalists. I try to give you an idea of how these plants have been used over a period of more than 2,000 years, sometimes 4,000 or 5,000 years, from region to region, across the world to the present day. So you can see, even if these plants have not been tested in a laboratory, the empirical knowledge that's been passed down and built up and added to by peoples in parts of the world that were not talking to each other, that found similar uses for the same plant, we can kind of bring together into modern times into a very comprehensive understanding of the uses of these plants. That's really the goal of my books. I have, well, two goals. The first, of course, is to tell you what's all around you and encourage you to look for it and use it and not to take it for granted and not to be so reliant on medical professionals and even professional herbalists. Just do for yourself kitchen medicine. And the second is really to collect and build that body of knowledge from the entire Western world. Sometimes I do reference Chinese and Ayurvedic herbal references, herbal books, but I really want to focus on the Western herbal tradition because when you get into the Eastern traditions, there is a whole energetic system that the plants are just used very differently. If I was quoting from Chinese herbal medicine, I said tonifies yin. Okay, that doesn't help you a lot when you're looking for a plant for a sore throat or the flu. So, I mean, this is why I focus more on the Western tradition, which is incredibly rich and often overlooked as people have turned more to Eastern traditions, which are often very complex and more systematic in their approach. So, I'll just kind of go through a few of these. How about aronia? Aronia is black chokeberry, purple chokeberry. I mean, there are several of those around. Very high in vitamin C, of course, always used against scurvy. Native Americans put it in pemmican, which is berries and nuts and dried meat and fat all chopped up, sort of the an ancient version of kind of beef jerky, a survival food. Very immune supportive. You can grow aronia just about anywhere. It's very popular among permaculture folks. We get into baccharis, which is a really interesting plant. This is the broom plant. Again, one that's kind of considered a weed, has a really interesting history in herbal medicine, going back to the ancient Greeks, who used it for bruises, convulsions, hernias, falls from high places, hard breathing, obstinate coughs, painful urination, increased menstruation, and used for those bitten by snakes. That's according to Dioscorides. I mean, we kind of overlook broom these days, to put it mildly. And Scotch broom, well, it has some very interesting properties. It's somewhat of a hallucinogen or a narcotic. It does have some medicinal properties, but it's it was widely planted by our government to prevent erosion, just like kudzu got out of control. And it can be found just about everywhere these days, but it's a little toxic. So I'm not saying it should be used as such, but it's a very interesting plant. And I also talk a lot about the Irish tradition. I failed to mention that earlier. The For instance, of the barberry, I mentioned just a few minutes ago. In the Irish tradition, from the herbal Hypericum, it's just called an Irish herbal now. It says the inner bark, which is of a deep yellow color, is good for jaundice, and the fruit to relieve diarrhea. That is true. That has been found true and used for that purpose in every single culture on earth who has used this plant. Barberry, Oregon grape, can be used interchangeably with golden seal and coptis, which is gold thread. Whether you're looking at the ancient Russian tradition, whether you're looking at ancient Greece, you're looking at Native Americans, everyone found the same uses for these plants. I mean, the Lumbee Indians, which are right here in North Carolina, largest Indian tribe in the entire United States, they say the Lumbee healer would often boil the stems and roots into a tea to treat an ulcerated stomach and cankers. A piece of the green root was chewed by some Lumbee to relieve discomfort of the stomach. The virtue is thought to lie in the bitterness. Again, a bitter tonic. There's calycanthus or sweet shrub. I'm only in the C's. Honestly, y'all, this is about 370 pages of the medicinal shrubs that you're going to find all around you. I mean, ceanothus, which is New Jersey tea, that was very popular tea substitute during the Revolutionary War period and again during the Civil War period when there were blockades, when they weren't letting tea in. The the settlers, the early Americans, learned from the Native Americans. The Cherokee used New Jersey tea for tiredness in the chest. That's usually, basically a weak heart, or it can be from weakened lungs. And they also would drink a large amount of tea to induce vomiting. Oh, and they used it for bowel complaints. The Lumbees used a poultice made from the inner root bark combined with red oak and mullein for inflammations and sprains. And the Chippewa used a decoction of the roots for constipation and shortness of the breath. This is a plant that, it entered into official American medicine. King's American Dispensatory of 1898 says its official uses were as an astringent, an expectorant, a sedative, antispasmodic, an antisyphilitic. It was good for against syphilis. Used to treat gonorrhea, dysentery, asthma, chronic bronchitis, whooping cough, and other pulmonary affections. Doses of a strong decoction, 1 tablespoon 3 or 4 times a day. It has likewise been successfully used as a wash and a gargle, and good for fevers, sore mouths, ulcerations, etc. So you can see New Jersey tea, which is a fairly common shrub in the wild. Sometimes you see it in landscaping. Has incredible properties. Tommy Bass, who was a really important figure in herbal medicine here in the Appalachian Mountains. He was in the mountains of Alabama. We do actually have some low mountains that go down that far. And he continued to practice Appalachian herbal medicine well into the 70s and 80s. I'm not exactly sure when he died, but he preserved this tradition when it had fallen out of favor with most people and was very important for preserving the tradition that I practice. Actually, he used the root decoction to relieve constipation with bloating and shortness of breath. He, I guess, learned from the Cherokee to use as a mouthwash for toothaches. He used it as a gargle for sore throats, thrush, and oral inflammation, and as a decoction of the root to treat prostate inflammation, psoriasis, and glandular swelling. So, very important. And it's just one that we would, overlook. Buttonbush. You can see the Cephalanthus. I'm still in the C's. I'll just kind of run through a list of them, and if anything jumps out at me, I'll mention to you. Cephalotaxis, which is plum yew, not the poisonous yew. Leatherleaf, Chimphyla, that's Pipsissewa. That's one of the plants that's called wintergreen. It has so many uses. Both the Chimphyla, the Pipsissewa, or the Gaultheria. These are just really useful plants for a wide variety of conditions, from urinary tract infections to helping get rid of fevers to sore muscles and joints. And of course, the Pipsissewa was often included in a smoking mixture by Native Americans. They put tobacco, Pipsissewa, and the bark of the red osier dogwood. Now, medicinally, these are very strong plants. They probably helped reduce a lot of the damage that tobacco would have done to the lungs, but this was usually used in ceremonial smoke. The red osier dogwood has some narcotic properties. So, really interesting tradition there. And, I've seen that mixture mostly in Cherokee sources, but then I also found it being used by the Lakota Sioux. So this must have been, very popular, probably traded a lot among the tribes. There's a bitter orange that is the only orange that is native and actually grows in my area. That's Citrus trifoliata. So it's a plant that has a wide variety of uses. Clematis. Clematis has been used going back to ancient Greece and beyond. These plants are in the buttercup and ranunculaceae family. They can be very potent. They can blister the skin. They can be poisonous, or they can have really good herbal healing properties depending on which clematis you're using. So before you go using a clematis, you want to get my book and find out which ones are useful. And some of them are actually very useful. and one of them like Traveler's Joy or Virgin's Bower. Those are native and have been used among Native American and early American and Appalachian herbalists for generations. Very similar plants were known in ancient Greece and in the British tradition, in the German tradition. So, in the Cherokee, use Virgin's Bower as an ingredient in a formula for urinary trouble, for yellow, painful urination, and for kidney trouble, and also for bedwetting in children. Interestingly enough, one of the very, very interesting sources that I use for early American herbal knowledge is called Towards an American Materia Medica. This was written in colonial America. It was sort of part of the eclectic movement where they were bringing together European traditions and merging them with what they were learning from the Native Americans. And in this book, the author mentions that Dr. Stock of Vienna had studied the Virgin's Bower, which apparently was grown there as well as being native to North America, and found it a very acrid and active plant, which he recommended for cancerous, venereal, and other malignant ulcers, and also in obstinate pains of the head and bones and other diseases. An infusion of the flowers and leaves and extract of the plant were used internally, and the powdered plant was sprinkled on ulcers to help them heal. So again, you have to be very careful of which clematis you are using, because one of them might help heal an ulcer where the other causes blisters. Other plants, just going through them, we've got Comptonia, sweet fern. I'm skipping a lot of these as I go along. I've got several hundred plants here in this book. Sweet fern makes a very nice tea. It has some medicinal uses, good for colds and such. And sweet fern is not actually a fern. It's a shrub, by the way. I don't know how it got the name sweet fern, but it's a nice, pleasant, has a nice aroma to it. And it was another of those tea substitutes when tea was unavailable. We talk about cornus, which is dogwood, very good for sore throats, very good for colds. Dogwood has some quinine-like properties. It's antiviral. Very important to know your dogwoods when we're looking at epidemics um, like COVID or you know swine flu or avian flu and the like. These plants, these trees and shrubs that contain quinine-like substances can be very useful. We talk about hazelnut. It's a nice astringent, does many things. Crataegus, which is hawthorn. Hawthorn has so many uses. Hawthorn is a heart tonic, among other things. Hawthorn has also traditionally been a Christian symbol. It was thought that St. Joseph's staff was made of hawthorn, and Jesus' crown of thorns was made of hawthorn. It used to be that wherever you saw a hawthorn planted, you knew there was a Christian living there. And that was a very important way before people were literate, before people could read signs. A lot of people fail to realize that the majority of people were not literate until just a few hundred years ago. So there were many symbols and signs that were put up to say, point the way to a church or a monastery, which would also be a free hospital to anybody who showed up. Those would be crosses beside the road. They could be statues, or they might be hawthorns. Just the other day, somebody asked me about garden huckleberry or Galeus sacca. This is native to my region, has somewhat limited herbal use, but the Lumbee Indians found a very good use for it. Mr. Vernon Cooper was a Lumbee healer, and he called it he huckleberry. And he would prepare the leaves and fruit of the he huckleberry into a tonic to treat early stages of diabetes. The tea was recommended for the treatment of diabetes of the blood or kidneys. Mr. Vernon believed that diabetes of the kidneys caused a lot of fluid buildup in various parts of the body. And of course, diabetes does cause edema. And Plants for a Future, which is a modern source, says that infusion of the leaves and bark has been used in the treatment of dysentery. And infusion of the leaves has been used in the treatment also of Bright's disease. Another one that is grown ornamentally all over. We also have several wild varieties. I have a ton of these in my yard. They can actually be quite difficult to keep under control, to keep from taking over where I live. Hydrangea. Hydrangeas are just a pretty little bush that has the pom-pom-like flowers. They can be white or they can be blue or they can be pink, depending on the pH of the soil. Well, hydrangea actually has a long history of use in Native American and early American herbal medicine. It's not used much now, okay, because it is slightly toxic. Has to be used with care. You have to know what you're doing. But, Miss Grieve in A Modern Herbal, England, 1931, she said that hydrangea was diuretic, cathartic, and tonic. Decoction said to have been used with great advantage by the Cherokee Indians and later by the settlers for calculous diseases. That means kidney and bladder stones. That it does not cure the stone in the bladder, but as demonstrated to the medical profession by Dr. S. W. Butler of Burlington, New Jersey, it removes gravelly deposits and relieves the pain consequent on their emission. As many as 120 calculi have been known to come from one person under its use. That would be a miserable person. Okay, 120 bladder and kidney stones. They needed some kind of help. And apparently, it was proven to a doctor in New Jersey, Butler, so he's kin to me. I'm kin to anybody with a common last name to one of my ancestors, um, that this worked very well. But she cautions in overdoses, it will cause vertigo and impressions of the chest. That's nothing to be taken lightly. When you get dizzy and you feel like you can't breathe and maybe your heart isn't beating right. So again, I'm not saying run out and use this one. I'm saying learn about its use. So if you ever need it, you know the right way to use it. I found from a Cherokee source the hydrangea was used in several of their formulas. Now, the Cherokee had interesting formulas for things that we would not necessarily understand in in modern thought, or unless you have been well schooled in Cherokee tradition and lore. I have been fortunate enough to know several Cherokee. My mentor, my herbal mentor, was a mix of Cherokee and Catawba. I have some understanding, but when they say that it was used in an ingredient in the medicine for menstruating women who dream of giving birth to animals or unnatural beings, I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, that is far beyond my purview. I mean, seriously. But they also used it to stop vomiting in children from 18 months to 10 years old, using a cold tea of the inner bark, and would take the freshly scraped bark and put it on burns or rising swellings. And a poultice was also made of it for sore and swollen muscles. By the time we get to King's Medical Dispensatory again, it's 1898. By the way, this research by Dr. Butler of Burlington, New Jersey, is mentioned in Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests in 1860. It's mentioned in King's Medical Dispensary of 1898. Apparently, Dr. S. W. Butler did a great deal of research on hydrangea, and it tells the whole story again of this patient with 120 kidney and bladder stones. You can only imagine how absolutely miserable that man or woman must have been. Probably a man. See, he again gives that same warning of an overdose would produce unpleasant symptoms such as dizziness in the head, oppression of the chest. But they found another doctor named Dr. Eoff said it was a tonic and cathartic and diuretic, and that specifically an extract of hydrangea was not only good for the kidney stones and such, but mucus irritation of the bladder in aged persons. So a very interesting plant, very pretty plant, always one of my favorites. My grandmother had them just growing. She would get the soil just right so they were blue flowers and white flowers, and she'd have them all throughout her backyard. I have wonderful memories of that plant. And Tommy Bass relied heavily on wild hydrangea to treat gallbladder problems, kidney stones, rheumatic inflammation, gout, and liver congestion, according to Medicinal Plants of the Southern Appalachians. Now, Botany in a Day tells us why the overdose of this plant could be a little dangerous. It says the fresh leaves contain a cyanide, but some species are dried and powdered for use as a tea sweetener. Well, that's interesting. Medicinally, the roots are emetic, cathartic, diuretic, and anthementic. The plant might contain an anti-malarial alkaloid. So this is very important to look at Again, those anti-malarial alkaloids can be very useful in other bad viruses. Actually, I looked up the official statement of modern medicine, which is a physician's desk reference for herbal medicine. This is what a physician has. So if you go in and say, Doc, I'm taking these herbs, he can look it up and say, well, what is this going to do? Is it going to interact with any of the medication I'm going to give to the person? Is it dangerous to them in any way? This is what a doctor uses, not what an herbalist normally use. It says the drug, meaning the hydrangea extract, has a diuretic effect. Unproven uses include the treatment of urinary tract, particularly the bladder and kidney stones. But this is interesting though. It says no health hazards or side effects are known in conjunction with the proper administration of designated therapeutic dosage. According to information in older medical literature, the intake of larger doses can cause dizziness, a feeling of constriction of the chest, and central nervous system disorders. Okay, so here's the modern PDR referencing the same sources that I've been referencing going back into the early 1800s, late 1700s even, and very importantly, it says no health hazards or side effects are known in conjunction with the proper administration of a designated therapeutic dose. So, where you're looking at a source where doctors are basically going to try to convince you don't use this herb, it could be dangerous, in their official book, it says it's safe if used as intended. And another one that has so many uses is St. John's wort, Hypericum. There are so many varieties of St. John's wort. I have 15 that grow in my area. So I actually have more St. John's worts that are native to my area, plus one introduced, than are actually have documented use in herbal medicine. But St. John's wort has been found as incredibly useful going well back to the ancient Greeks. I mean, Dioscorides wrote about St. John's wort. He recommended it taken with wine for fevers and paroxysms, which are spasms. He was really talking more of like malarial fevers and such because he was talking about fevers that occurred every third or fourth day. He said a decoction of the seeds taken as a drink for 40 days would cure sciatica. Now, that is interesting because recent studies have shown that St. John's wort can heal damaged nerves. So going back almost 3,000 years, we're finding St. John's wort used as a cure for sciatica, which is nerve pain in the hip and leg, often going all the way down to the foot, if it's severe. He said the leaves and the seeds put together would heal burns applied as like a poultice. He lists all kinds of uses for St. John's wort. By Gerard's time in Elizabethan England, St. John's wort was, well, it had the religious significance. It had been associated with St. John, but it also had been used for thousands of years and was just it would have been used as commonly as a folk medicine as a physician would have prescribed. He said that St. John's wort, with its flowers and seed, boiled and drunketh, provoketh the urine. Okay, he wrote in the Elizabethan English. Let's see if I can just make this a little easier to listen. It provokes urine and is good against bladder stones and could be used for sores, scalds, burns, and wounds, just as Dioscorides had said. He recommended making an oil of St. John's wort to be used for all manner of wounds, injuries, bruises, even deep wounds. It's very common usage of St. John's wort even today. St. John's wort is often used. Arnica oil is the very best thing for wounds. St. John's wort is usually considered the second best thing for wounds. St. John's wort, because of its nerve healing properties, also really good for nerve pain, for sore muscles. And he mentioned also that it would take away the tertian and quartian agues. Those, again, are malarial fevers. Miss Grieve mentioned that the St. John's wort is astringent and expectorant and good for the nerves again. It's amazing how empirical evidence taken over hundreds of years just now being tested and proven in laboratories. She also recommended it for children with incontinence or bedwetting. An Irish herbal said it provokes the urine and breaks up stone in the bladder. It stops diarrhea, cures fever, and the seed boiled for 40 days healed sciatica. Where do you think the Irish learned that from? They learned it from the Benedictine monks who took the knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman herbal medicine throughout Europe. Father Nape in the German folk medicine tradition thought it was particularly good for the liver and for phlegm or mucus in the head, the chest, the lungs. Brother Aloysius, who was kind of his protege, also liked it for lung complaints. He said it is used for lung complaints, catarrh, that's congestion, chronic catarrh, asthma, chills, bladder congestion, and if the urine is thick, also used for hysteria, jaundice, absence of menstruation due to illness, green sickness, blood spitting, leukorrhea, pneumonia, rheumatism, fever, intestinal blockage, dysentery, nervous cramps, uterine cramps. He goes on and on and on. For bruises, he talks about that. For shivering, uh, Father Kunzel, who was also in that tradition, well, he wrote a great deal of St. John's wort, and he also used it against gangrene and other infections. St. John's wort, I could go on and on about this herbal alone. I think I wrote more than 20 pages on it, literally. It was used very much in Poland and Russia, and the Cherokees gave it to babies. The Cherokees used it to give babies strength. They actually would bathe babies in a tea made of St. John's wort. And they said it would help them be stronger and get sick less and would help them to walk sooner. So anyway, St. John's wort is just one of the most absolutely useful of plants. And as we read through the literature, we also find that it's good for melancholy. Well, another thing that modern researchers have found is that St. John's wort does help, especially with seasonal depression. It actually increases serotonin. So St. John's wort is good for melancholy, or what we now call depression. The only side effect, the only downside of St. John's wort is it can make a person more prone to sunburn. But that's just one of literally hundreds of shrubs and woody vines you're going to learn about in this plant. And honestly, I could go on and on. I've only read through just a few of these. And I mean, when you get into Smilax greenbrier, which has some adaptogenic properties, you get into Gelsemium, which has incredible potential to replace narcotic pain medication to help people perhaps get off of opiates, but is so incredibly dangerous and should only be used by people who know exactly what they're doing. You're going to find information in this book that you're not going to find elsewhere. You're going to find information where you say, okay, that's interesting, but that's too dangerous. I'm not touching that. Maybe if you're somebody that is actually interested in researching some of these plants like Gelsemium that could make the biggest difference in our culture in terms of drug addiction and dependence and overdose, maybe you will research this. Maybe you will find these sources and begin testing this out in a laboratory. And maybe if you're medically inclined, get some clinical trials going on this and see if we can find a good alternative. Uh, you're not. Maybe you're a person who is looking for an interesting plant like kudzu. Yes, the vine that ate the South. I talk about that in here. The leaves can be eaten like spinach. They're actually rich in protein. The flowers can be used to make jams and wines. The root has antiviral properties. And very interestingly, kudzu root is used in China to combat alcoholism. It makes people who crave alcohol less. So from very practical, common plants that you can walk outside and find that you might use for a sore throat or to stop diarrhea, to plants that are antiviral, to plants that can just be poulticed and put on wounds to promote healing, to really fascinating toxic plants that should only be used by professional that just are absolutely fascinating to read the history about and how people learned about them. I mean, the guy who discovered Gelsemium jessamine in America. It was known by the Native Americans. They had been using it for pain and such insomnia and various conditions for a long time. He was a plantation owner, I believe, somewhere in Georgia or Alabama, and he was suffering from severe nerve and neck and back pain. And he sent one of his servants out to the garden. And he said, dig up this root, make a tea of it, and let me sip on it. It'll help. The servant dug up the wrong root. The servant dug up Gelsemium, had no idea what it was. Comes back, makes a tea of it. The man takes a couple sips of the tea and was completely paralyzed for, I believe, 3 days. He could blink his eyes. He was breathing, but it was shallow. They called in doctors. The friends came along. They were ready. They thought he was going to die any minute. He eventually starts coming back. He gets his speech back. Later, he can start moving his fingers, and he eventually comes, full recovery. And he tells them that for that period of time, and we're talking like 3 days, not only was he completely paralyzed, but he had no pain whatsoever. And it was the most peaceful, calm, or restful state he had ever been in. Now, anybody who knows about opiates and such would, and the doctors around him immediately said, hey, that sounds like morphine. We need to look into this. So they started doing clinical trials with it. And had it not been for the pharmaceutical industry, it could very well be that Gelsemium, which is a central nerve system depressant, may have been used in place of opium, which is far more addictive, especially synthetic opiates. We're talking, let's start with morphine and heroin, and now we're all the way up to fentanyl and such as that, and OxyContin in between and all that. Had the medical profession spent more time on Gelsemium, who knows, right? But I'm going to tell you, don't ever touch the plant because eating as much as one leaf or one flower will kill you dead. It is literally that dangerous, but fascinating to read about. Obviously, I think this stuff is just wonderful, you know. But it is an interesting book. Like I said, it's like 372 pages, and it's available from me. You can get it as a PDF. You can read about it on my blog, which is southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com. If you receive my newsletter through Substack, you got a notification of it a few days ago. The article's still posted there, judsoncarroll.com or Judson Carroll Master Herbalist. Or you can go straight to Amazon and order the paperback today, or a Kindle, or if you need another, such as that. Remember, we are absolutely surrounded by useful medicinal herbs. We have this bounty that God gave us, an herb, a plant for every need we will have. And as it says in the Bible, and as my hero George Herter was very fond of quoting, my people die for lack of knowledge. So get my book, get some good field guides. There's some very useful plant ID apps you can download these days. There are websites at nearly every state's major university that has a botany department does that will help you identify these plants if you don't know them already. There's so many here that you're going to recognize right away. You're going to know prickly pear cactus. Prickly pear cactus is a prickly pear cactus. You're going to know rhododendrons. You're going to know, well, hopefully you know sumac, not poison sumac, but actually the bush sumac, the berries of which we use to make a nice lemonade type beverage. It's one of our good foraging plants. You'll probably know currants and gooseberries. You should certainly know locust. The locust trees have the thorns on them. Saw palmetto. Saw palmetto grows at the coast and further down. An excellent herbal remedy, herbal preventative, and such for prostate issues, enlarged prostate. You'll certainly know willows. Blackberries and raspberries. They have so many excellent herbal uses. So do your blueberries. We're talking, you can use the leaves, you can use the root, the fruit. They all have different uses. Roses, elderberries. You'll find this stuff growing all around you, and you will be absolutely amazed by the uses. Like yucca, for instance. Yucca is very common. Family of grapes that grow all throughout the South Wild and grow in vineyards Grapes have wonderful medicinal uses. Wonderful. I mean, so many, from the astringency to helping blurred vision and eyesight. You'll be amazed by some of the ways that grape vines, grape leaves, the fruit of grapes have been used throughout history. And I think you're really going to enjoy this book. So anyway, y'all have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time. Please buy my books if you are so inclined, and really use them just to get out and look around, because you're going to find a lot of this in your yard. You're going to find a lot of these plants in your park. You're going to find a lot of these plants just walking down the sidewalk if you're in town, or just taking a stroll, through the countryside. You're going to start recognizing these plants, and when you know what they can be used for, they're there when you need them. They're there so that you don't have to go get a diagnosis and go to a pharmacy and all that. You'll have what you need at home to use when you need it. That's how we can prevent pandemics. Stay home as much as possible. That's how we can prevent out of control medical costs. Have kitchen remedies, home remedies for the instances where you actually don't really need a doctor. Go to a doctor when you need a doctor. But a lot of people who go to the doctor could take care of themselves at home probably more effectively than whatever medication they're going to get, whatever pharmaceutical they're going to be prescribed. That's my opinion. As I always say, I'm not a doctor and I give no medical advice, but it is truly what I believe. Y'all have a great week, and I will see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.